Across centuries, the Aegean Sea remains the timeless world of myth. In myth, we store our oldest memories, journey to our beginnings, walk the streets of towns fallen to rubble 1,000 years before we were born. Anchored at Dia, a small bare island off the north coast of Crete, the Calypso too will make such a journey, backward into time. It all began with a chance aerial photograph. I had, of course, encountered the Atlantis legend in many places. Indeed, my son Philippe traveled to the Azores, Coco Island, Bimini, and elsewhere to investigate claims that each is Atlantis. Yet, as I studied the photographic blow-ups of an odd thumb-like shape outlined under the waters of St. George's Bay, I did not then imagine where it would lead. I hardly suspected that soon I too would find myself embarked on a new quest, pursuing a myth, without familiar landmarks or stars, searching for the long-lost civilization of Atlantis that many still believe lies buried under the sea.
Like the record of Earth itself, the history of man often is hidden in riddles. A strangely carved stone in a wilderness, a city entombed in volcanic ash, its life caught in an endless pause, a ruin or shipwreck swallowed by the sea. Yet men insist on answers, sometimes true, sometimes fanciful. In the clear waters of the Bahamas shallows off Florida, Philippe Cousteau and his airborne team will find both. Beneath the wings of the PBY, a perfectly round islet lies like a stain on the sea. Here, submerged sandforms are constantly reshaped by shifting tides and currents. There, a broken line of coral reefs. From the plane's side blister, Philippe views a stranger apparition, a geometric pattern similar to ancient landscape designs, often believed signals to space. But the intersecting dotted lines are only the seismic blast holes left by survey teams searching for oil. A blue hole, which often is described as unfathomable, but actually is no more than 350 to 400 feet deep, is shot by Dr. David Zink, historian and explorer. Near Nassau, the travelers see the rectangular underwater structure, long imagined by casual observers to be the ruins of an ancient temple. An exploratory dive during a brief stopover reveals no ruined temple, only long, weed-grown piles of rough stone. It is, in fact, says Dr. Zink, a pen or so-called kraal, similar to other enclosures in the area, once used for the storing of sponges, but long since abandoned. Now the travelers near the destination they have come far to find, in the waters off Bimini Island. The odd, reversed J shape called the Bimini Road. Though it has been surmised that much of the construction, or its surrounding area, still lies concealed under the shifting sands of the bottom, more than a third of a mile, the length of 6 football fields, lies clearly defined, a puzzle with no easy answer. Slowly wheeling into the wind, Philippe brings the converted World War II reconnaissance and rescue aircraft down to a landing almost directly above the Great J. Now seaborne, the versatile flying boat becomes a headquarters for aquatic exploration. With co-pilot Michael Sullivan and other members of the team, Philippe soon exchanges flyer's garb for a diver's gear. Now makes a descent direct from the seaplane itself. Guided by Dr. Zink, the divers move through the warm, shallow waters, hardly 15 feet deep, at last reach the so-called road itself. This, some students believe, is a visible fragment of Atlantean civilization from which both Egypt and the pre-Columbian cultures of Central America learned the arts of pyramid building. Those convinced that the road is the work of megalithic builders in early historic times argue that only a highly skilled human agency could have chiseled the square edges of these 15-ton stones and assembled them as a pavement, bearing no natural relationship to the bedrock. Nevertheless, core samples have shown that both pavement and underlying rock are composed of the same consolidated limestone sediment. Atlantis or no, the structure today is guarded by nothing more than an occasional poisonous rockfish camouflaged among the stones. Later, on the wing of the PBY, Philippe and Dr. Zink discuss possible explanations for the site.
What do you think it is?
Well, I think it's a megalithic site.
Which is?
The big stones, the Greek words of big stones, such as the megalithic sites in Europe, Karnak, Brittany, Stonehenge in England. They were a people that had some, I can't prove it yet, but I suspect a people of some astronomical sophistication, a people that by some means or another could handle at least 15-ton stones, were well organized enough to plan out a project and carry it out. Various peoples were in the area generally, but this seems to relate to no known culture pattern. We encountered so many problems with various compasses here underwater, we suspect some kind of energy pattern here that's affecting the magnetic field. I don't know what it is, but...
But you have ruled out in your mind, and you are sure yourself that this is not natural formation.
That's about all I'm sure about.
Yes.
My argument is essentially morphological in structure, the pattern. In nature, it's most unusual to have joints terminate abruptly. We would expect, if this were a natural formation of beach rock formed in place here, we would expect it to have a little more substantial relationship to the bedrock. And as you saw, it does not. We're often little stones supporting, leaving a space under. The horseshoe, of course, it opens to the northeast. It is, you saw the extension, which makes it into a horseshoe, taking it out of a reverse J configuration and in more of a horseshoe or hairpin kind of opening to the northeast. Here's where the fracture is, and here's where the transition
from large stones to small stones.
Yeah, and the 5 across, too. 14 single stones here, and 5 across here.
But here we have 6.
6 following after, yes. I'm not claiming this is Atlantis, but this is an interesting coincidence. Plato claimed that the Atlanteans honored every 5th and 6th year alternatively. 5 and 6 then were sacred numbers, apparently. So this is one of the coincidences here.
You said, I think, once that this might have been the origin of the legend of Atlantis?
I feel that it may possibly relate to Atlantis, for one thing, because of its antiquity. But if I speculate in that direction, to me it makes no sense as anything but some kind of outpost or colonial outrider, so to speak.
Do you think it's possible that Plato would have made it up entirely?
Anything is possible, but, well, in a time of difficulty, in a time of agony about the present and the future, it's so easy to look to a golden age, you know, and it's comfortable psychologically. It's a rationalization, in short. Well, that's one way to interpret it. But there are other ways.
What would be the impact if it was found? If
the impact, of course, anyone who has the slightest interest in Atlantis is interested in it because of its impact, and its impact essentially would be, I suppose, look out, maybe you'll go down the drain too. You know, a highly sophisticated civilization can fail.
Despite its many forms, the Atlantis legend has but a single source, Plato, who told of a rich land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, its capital city ringed by canals and inhabited by a people noble and wise, all shattered and sunk in a single day. Though modern ocean mapping has found no suitable scar, Cousteau points out that man's invention has imagined Atlantis almost anywhere. Easter Island in the south and Coco Island in the north are thought fragments of a Pacific continent called Mu, a variant of the Atlantis legend. Bimini in the West Atlantic, the Canary Islands off Africa, the Azores, the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, Helgoland off Germany in the North Sea, the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. For each, ardent supporters have argued its claim to be Plato's earthly paradise. But always the evidence is implausible or contrary to known fact, or at the least, insufficient. At Easter Island, the Akus are mute witnesses of a turbulent past, but hardly the history of Atlantis. Journeying to Coco Island off the west coast of Costa Rica, Philippe Cousteau does find something that approaches a paradise. Everywhere, the island is green with luxuriant growth and flowers, the air filled with tropical birds, its landscape hung with misty waterfalls. Yet it bears little resemblance to Atlantis. The Azores, perhaps, lie closest to the literal site described by Plato, but there is no evidence that a high civilization died here. The great flights of birds, sometimes circling a point in the South Atlantic, hardly prove, as some insist, that they seek the sunken Atlantis, once a resting place on their migratory route to South America. Yet legend sometimes grows around a kernel of fact. Myth often serves a continuing human need, a faith to buttress man against adversity. On the north coast of Crete, at Epiphany each January 6th, the people of Heraklion follow their guardian priests in solemn procession to perform an annual ritual. Not far from Calypso, lying at the stone jetty, the procession moves to the harbor's edge. There, as the blessed cross is thrown into the water and quickly retrieved, the people celebrate a communion with the sea, ancient long before Christianity. Only several miles away, on the high land above the modern harbor, the ruins of the great palace of Knossos lie silent now. But here once was the center of a fabled civilization. Here, from 3000 BC, Minoan kings ruled the seas of the eastern Mediterranean for 1,500 years. Yet oddly, they had no safe harbor then along a coast swept by the fierce northwest wind, the Meltemi. As a mariner, Cousteau finds the paradox intolerable. To rule the seas, one must have a safe and ample port. But where? The island 7 miles away? Visited only by occasional fishermen, or the priest who comes to perform Mass once a year, Dia is silent and uninhabited. Yet as Cousteau observes the bays of its deeply indented southern or leeward side, he feels a gathering certainty that ships have found shelter here since early times. No sooner has Calypso dropped anchor than the diving team prepares to make its first exploratory descent from the launch, hopeful that history has left its evidence scattered upon the bottom. Albert Falco, the chief diver, is particularly eager. From an earlier dive in the waters off the island years ago, he remembers a glimpse of a copper plate near a half-buried ancient galley. With Cousteau, an interested observer awaits the result. Dr. Kritsas, archaeologist and representative of the Greek government. Almost at once, at about 100 feet of depth, the divers' lights begin to reveal a submerged field of artifacts. The scattered array of pottery and miscellaneous debris from hundreds of years of trade, war, piracy, and casual accidents of the sea. Elegant and alone, a coffee urn gleams in the light. Everywhere, it seems, jars and amphoras from periods as far back as Roman times lie half embedded in the sediment of the bottom. Again at the surface, the diving team hurries back to Calypso. Even at a distance, seen from the deck of the ship, they hardly appear as bearers of bad news. As the launch pulls alongside, Falco quickly confirms Cousteau's conjectures regarding Dia's use as a shelter for ships. Though Falco has not found his remembered galley, he reports the riches that litter the bottom. Unnumbered amphora and other pottery, many of them still almost intact. Immediately, Cousteau joins the search. Accompanied by Falco, he now makes a descent in the Soucoupe, the self-contained diving saucer, extending the range of the first reconnaissance. At 120 feet, there looms from the bottom the coagulated cargo of a Roman shipwreck, dating from the 1st century after Christ. Nearby, a more recent relic appears, a rusted anchor probably lost during the Venetian siege of Crete. In bay after bay, reefs of pottery mark the sites of other sunken ships. Clearly, over a period of at least 2,000 years, Dia has been a crossroads of maritime traffic in the eastern Mediterranean. Because aerial views sometimes reveal the tracings of ancient pathways or structures not visible on the ground, an electric camera is bolted to the undercarriage of the helicopter to shoot a connected sequence of vertical views showing the entire island. From the air, the stony hills and sheer cliffs of Dia suggest little possible connection to a myth of Atlantis. Barren and forbidding, the vestiges of one-time walls and structures now enclose only emptiness. Amid the rocks grows a thinly scattered vegetation, barely enough to provide forage for the small bands of Cree-Cree, an endangered species of wild goat introduced on the island in what may be a futile effort to save it. Now, for the first time, at St. George's Bay, Cousteau sees the vague, milky outline of an underwater shelf jutting out from the shore of the peninsula. With Falco and cameraman Carco Pino in the wardroom aboard ship, Cousteau performs the painstaking task of joining the helicopter pictures in a complete mosaic of the island.
Et un, pas tout à fait au coin, là où il y a 2-3 épaisseurs. Au coin de 3 épaisseurs.
But as he carefully connects the broken fragments of landscape shown in the photographs, Cousteau cannot free his mind of the enigmatic image beneath the surface of St. George's Bay. What is it? Some natural feature, perhaps? Its outline seems too regular. More and more, Cousteau surmises that the underwater structure was built by human hands.
Il vaut mieux commencer par la plus basse, celle qui est à 37 pratiques. Non. Et le pendeur. Ah, le pendeur, on a 15 de doit être une dizaine de mètres.
Puzzled by the mysterious thumb shape, Cousteau now prepares to make an extended dive in St. George's Bay with Falco, Yvon Jacoletto, and Bernard Delamotte.
Que personne ne se fasse pointer sous le cadre quand il arrivera au fond.
Again, I enter a world at once familiar and strange, a world of subtle sensory distortions. Here it is easy to believe in myth. As we slowly pass over the weed-grown site, it is soon apparent that this is no natural formation. But what could be the purpose of a submerged, man-built mound, rising 65 feet from the bottom at its outer extremity? I can only assume that it stood out of the sea in ancient times, when, by modern calculation, the level of the Mediterranean was 10 to 15 feet lower than now. Though the mound is constructed mainly of rubble and ordinary round stones, there lie here and there carefully chiseled building blocks which serve no function and whose presence so far from shore seems inexplicable. Together, Bernard and I swim along the lateral wall, pause briefly at a wide furrow that breaks the slope. At last, we pass upward to reach the flat top of the mound, barely 10 feet below the surface. Abruptly, all is clear. We are on the wide expanse of a rounded jetty. Along its sides and in the water beyond, the harbor is crowded with broad-hulled merchant ships and even sleek war galleys of a dozen nations. On these stones jostle men of Egypt, Syria, Macedonia, and Sicily, working, trading, gambling, gossiping, so often they share a mutual vocabulary of hardly half a dozen words. This warehouse, whose remnant wall we measure, is crammed with bales of wool and fiber, with rows of amphora filled with oil and wines and salted meats and spices, for certainly here is one of the great intersections of the ancient world. Here, a ship stands on braces while a crew seals its ruptured hull. Of course, it was taken up this V-shaped ramp or groove by which ships are hauled from the water for repair. And surely for such a harbor there must have been a large town, walled no doubt against the pirates that infest the seas. I pose. Is it true? Or am I too engaged in myth building? I return to the surface.
Based on the mosaic, Cousteau has prepared an overlay showing the port and its huge fortified wall, nearly all now erased. Could it have been brought down by the legendary eruption at Thera to the north, which some believe caused the downfall of Minoan Crete? Perhaps, but as yet there is no proof that Dia existed at the time of Knossos. To hasten the search, a new craft is now formally added to Calypso's auxiliary fleet. The diving platform Ulysse, christened by Madame Cousteau in an appropriate ceremony. Later, tricolor flying, the raft is taken on its maiden voyage across the bay to the site of its first mission. For what becomes one of the most systematic underwater excavations ever attempted, Cousteau and Kritzas have selected a prospective site, 10 meters square, close to the sunken harbor jetty. Led by Bernard Delamotte, the divers prepare the area, sinking stakes at each corner for the strings which will mark the boundaries. For greater precision in fixing the location of any found artifact, the enclosure will be further subdivided into 25 smaller units, each 2 meters square. As the area at last is ready to be cleared for the dig, a large frame with 2 triangular supports is lowered into position on the bottom. Sliding along its crossbar, cameras will make stereoscopic photographs of each stage of the excavation. Aboard the Ulysse, the divers prepare to descend. This time, instead of the usual individual air tanks, they will depend upon a hookah, a system of multiple hoses whereby each diver draws his air from a common source, fed by a compressor. To test how well the filter is working, they sample the product with varying opinions. Delamont calls it mountain air.
Ah, il est bon, hein? Petit coup?
Raymond Call judges it antique. But soon, complaints forgotten. The suction pipe is lowered, the team suits up and plunges to the work site below. On bottom, each member of the team exchanges his diving fins for a shorter pair, less cumbersome in walking about the dig area. To counteract his natural buoyancy and prevent him from bouncing as he walks, each man wears a 20-pound weight at his groin to hold him down. With a signal to the surface, the Seuss is placed in action. Using the utmost care, the divers begin to draw the top stratum of sediment into the suction pipe, for nothing can be removed or unnecessarily disturbed without the prior consent of the Greek government representative, Dr. Kritsas. To retrieve even the smallest artifacts, the sediment and water are flushed through a strainer aboard the diving raft. For each 12-inch layer, more than 1,000 cubic feet of dirt and sand must be sifted. As the days pass and the first layer is gradually removed, a restless Cousteau dives to the site to learn why the dig is not proceeding more rapidly. Actually, he is well aware that the answer is self-evident. Amid this alien intrusion, schools of little red mullet veer to and fro. More distant, a spirograph or tube worm tosses like a flower in the spring breeze. Slowly, an increasing array of objects is emerging from centuries of oblivion. Yet each is left in place until it can be labeled, charted, photographed, and drawn. Meanwhile, the mullet have overcome their fear. Probing for the tiny sea organisms exposed by the Seuss, they are having a feast. After the first 12-inch layer of sediment is cleared, a crowded segment lies exposed. Here, history speaks in the mute language of clay, shaped for ordinary use by human hands, all unknowing that in 500 years or 5,000, other hands would receive them, touch them and wonder, give them an importance never foreseen or intended. Nevertheless, the cameras are recording a growing visual diary. Photographed by the stereoscopic cameras, the lines of the grid, like the minutes or centuries by which we divide time, suddenly frame the past. At last brought to the surface, each piece, broken or whole, is measured, catalogued, and again photographed by Dr. Kritsas and his assistant.
Και διάμετρο σωζωμένη 16.
Much of the pottery carries curious monograms or insignia scratched into the clay. These Kritsas carefully traces for further analysis by himself and other classical scholars, while nearby, his volunteer helper prepares a drawing. Escorted by Bernard Delamotte, Cousteau arrives to visit the shore team.
Bonjour.
Here, the divers are encamped around the only two buildings on the peninsula. The tiny vestry and church, used for a day or two each year, when the priest arrives to celebrate Mass and beg protection of the island's patron saint. Amid the rocks, a tiny apron-sized garden has been planted by the sound technician, but it is an act of misplaced faith. It is doubtful that anyone will eat the carrots, lettuce, and radishes. Though Dia has no people, it does have other residents who claim prior rights. By a tantalizing paradox, each discovery seems to open a new mystery. Displaying the artifacts brought up from the deepening excavation in the bay, Kritsas and Delamotte explain that all have been found above a curious bed of gravel that extends through the site and seems to serve as a dividing zone between eras.
Avant d'arriver au gravier. Sur le gravier, c'est posé sur le gravier. Posé sur le gravier. Il y en a quelques-uns.
Presque les carrés commencent à se remplir. Quelques morceaux qui vont commencer à apparaître. Ça, c'est que la surface, je crois, non?
Ah oui, c'est la surface.
Pratiquement la surface.
With few exceptions, most of the pottery recovered above the gravel stratum belongs to the Byzantine period in the Christian era, including several ingenious pitchers with a built-in strainer at the neck. But any artifacts of earlier cultures, if they are present, still lie buried in the sediment on the bottom. As the dig goes on, a wall of discarded rubble and stone grows beside it, most of it without particular significance. Yet again, Cousteau is struck by the increasing numbers of building stones that have been encountered. Again wonders what great natural convulsion could have swept them so far from land. As with the great Greek archaeologist Marinatos, who found evidence of a vast tidal wave on the coast of Crete, earthquake alone no longer seems to provide an adequate explanation. Week by week, the Seuss digs its trenches deeper into the successive layers, always repeating the regular procedure of mapping, labeling, photographing, and drawing. Now, with each stratum, soil samples also are taken and sent to geological laboratories for analysis. More readily identified, a growing treasure of amphoras, bowls, and pitchers are sent to the surface in the recovery baskets. Aboard the diving raft, the pots and shards are carefully separated and later cleaned of incrustations of sponges and other sea growth. Examining the recently recovered artifacts with Delamont, Kritsos explains that with each stratum excavated, the dig is probing deeper and deeper into the past. Though formerly almost all the pottery was Byzantine, now much of the material is Egyptian or Roman, even includes one or two pieces from the classical period of Greece in the 5th century before Christ. Clearly, the pots represent a transitional period to an earlier culture. But of Minoan artifacts, there is no sign.
The falcons rule the sky over Dia. That is their illusion. Actually, these falcons are a dying species. Like the wild goats, the kri-kri, they exist here at the pleasure of man. Most contradictory of creatures, he alone creates sanctuaries for his victims. For himself, there are no sanctuaries against his follies. Yet, as I look at the barren landscape, once timbered and green, I cannot believe that man alone created this desolation. I remember the legend of Atlantis' sudden destruction, the belief of some scholars that Minoan civilization, centered in Crete, may well have been the model 900 years before Plato for the Atlantis he described. As yet, however, the dig has revealed nothing to show that the port of Dia existed as early as Minoan Crete across the bay.
At the bottom of St. George's Bay, the excavation is coming to an end. After many weeks of effort, after digging through 10 feet of successive ancient strata, the divers at last are reaching an unyielding bed of solid rock. It is here, at the greatest depth, that the first evidence of Dia's earliest origins are found. A cup that clearly belongs to the Minoan epoch. It is the most important single artifact recovered at the site. Later, after the Sessus has been raised, and after Dr. Kritzas has authenticated the period, a number of other Minoan pieces are found. Not many, for in those early times, men were less wasteful in discarding possessions than later civilizations which would invent planned obsolescence. At a time when rule of the antique world rested with masters of the sea, Minoan Crete controlled the Mediterranean from Sicily to the Middle East. A starkly simple, unadorned cup reaffirms that as early as Minoan times, the key to Crete lay in the port of Dia. Upon the open ground, Cousteau and Kritzas find shards of pottery from various periods, even find the obsidian so desired by the ancients in the making of tools and weapons.
Obsidian stones. Look at that.
But if Dia was port and military outpost for the Minoan kings at Knossos and Crete, do the building blocks at the bottom of St. George's Bay indicate a natural disaster that left Crete defenseless and caused its abrupt decline? Was Minoan Crete Atlantis? Perhaps, but there is a flaw. Unlike Atlantis, Crete did not vanish under the sea.
We are at the top of this desert island, you know. It's amazing that we find so many things around these ruins. And who could have built this here? There are heaps of stones that probably were much higher in the past. And what amazes me is this big flat stone over there.
You think it's
and
not natural?
Here. I don't think it's natural. I think it has been, it's probably natural, but it has been
Flattened.
Flattened. I cannot help looking at this desert to be baffled, to be absolutely bedazzled. So close from Crete to find remains of civilization and no vegetation. Do you think it has been always that way? No.
I don't think so.
No. I'd like to have seen it in antiquity.
Even in model, the palace at Knossos is an apparition on an astonishing scale. Here for 1500 years, the Minoan kings presided over a high culture long before Greece was born. In these porticos and terraces, these courtyards and balustraded stairs, existed the scented aristocracy of a rich and talented civilization that would lie forgotten for 2000 years. here were born the legends of the bull worshippers, of Theseus's slaughter of the Minotaur, and of his escape from the palace labyrinth, led by Ariadne's thread. Perhaps, too, it was here that Plato's legend of Atlantis was born, for its similarities to Crete are many. Today, Knossos is a silent ruin, buried and unknown, until the English archaeologist Evans began clearing the site at the turn of the century. But what could have brought its precipitate destruction? All civilizations, like man, ultimately falter and die, by the infirmities of old age, sometimes by their own blind arrogance, sometimes, as in the legend of Atlantis, by a natural calamity. Today, there are clear evidences. Volcanic ash on the sea floor, coastal structures swept away, even biblical legends of plague and disaster, that the East Mediterranean was swept by an unparalleled cataclysm in the 15th century before Christ. To learn the answers, Calypso will go farther still through the Aegean and on to the island once shattered by what has been called the greatest explosion ever heard on Earth.
Cousteau Society and KCET are jointly responsible for the content of this program.
Like great stones scattered upon the sea, the Greek islands still bear witness to the changing myths of Western man. Here Theseus killed the Minotaur, here Icarus flew too close to the sun, here Ulysses beat his storm-tossed way back to Ithaca against the wrath of the sea god Poseidon. Today, a gentler god rules these waters. Upon the crags and promontories of even the most desolate islands, men have set the symbols of a new protective deity. Around church and shrine lie the vestiges of earlier times. Across the landscape, walls of rubble trace the broken history of our beginnings, the ruined stages of dramas we often can only guess. Beneath the sea lie mysterious shapes and littered cargo from the sunken ships of antiquity. Fathoms below the surface rests a burial sarcophagus that never reached its intended occupant. Here, the columns for a temple that was never built. And what of Atlantis? Does it too lie drowned in the Aegean? Object of search since Plato first described it. Is it fiction? Or is it the shadowed memory of a remote actual event, reshaped by human imaginings? With the Calypso anchored at the island of Sira, off northern Crete, Cousteau searches for evidence to prove or disprove scholarly theories that Atlantis and Minoan civilization were the same. Beneath the helicopter, Sira is an arid waste. It is hard to imagine that once it was forested and green, that these scattered Minoan ruins may have been part of the Atlantis Plato described. Minoan arts and trade dominated the eastern Mediterranean for 1,500 years. Then, in the 15th century before Christ, Minoan power went into abrupt decline. Why? What suddenly had so weakened Crete that she now could be overrun by Greeks from the mainland? Because Sira is one of the few shelters for ships on Crete's exposed northern coast, Cousteau is hopeful that its surrounding waters may reveal useful clues. Helped into his suit by diver Patrick Delamotte, whom he jokingly calls his favorite dresser, Cousteau, with companions Raymond Call and Yvon Jacoletto, prepares to make an underwater reconnaissance. With a camera to record their finds, they make their first dive beside the peninsula that juts like a bony finger into the sea.
The helicopter views look promising, but we are totally unprepared for the astonishing apparition that awaits us. Along the slanting shelf of the bottom, there stretches, perpendicular to the shore, an uneven wall, indented by bays or scallops, extending some 100 yards long and 30 yards wide. It is, in fact, an immense deposit of pottery, literally hundreds of thousands of vases, pitchers, and cups. Though a few lie detached, most have been cemented together in one huge bristling mass by the chemical action of the sea. What on earth could have caused such an assemblage of pottery vessels, many still undamaged, and as serenely beautiful as this simple cup? Only later, remembering the bays that broke the wall, will it occur to me that perhaps it was once a row of ancient ships, each laden with the jars, by which traders transported oils, wines, spices, and other commodities in early times. Then, sunken, the cargoes had retained the rough contours of the hull as the ship's timbers rotted and disappeared. Yet, why would a dozen ships, fully laden, sink almost side by side as if tied to a pier or jetty? And what is the significance of the random building stones we find? As we drift in growing puzzlement, I meet another living creature, an aplysia or sea hare, a large mollusk without a shell. Willingly, it joins in wordless play with a stranger, but it gives me no answers.
Still bemused by the multiple questions raised by the pottery wall, Cousteau returns to the deck of Calypso. To Chief Diver Albert Falco, he describes the extraordinary accumulation of artifacts lying beneath the Calypso's hull. Some of the pots can be pried loose quite readily, but most of the jars and cups are deeply embedded in the rigid mass. A large chunk of the conglomerate is hoisted to the deck for a closer look.
Amenez-le par ici. Oui, c'est bien.
Though the vivid colors of the living algae will quickly fade, Cousteau believes the fragment will serve as an interesting exhibit, revealing the condition in which artifacts are often recovered from the sea.
C'est un petit morceau de cette falaise de poterie.
With Lazaros Kolonas, archaeologist and official representative of the Greek government, he demonstrates the position of the pottery and later discusses the mystery of the wall.
Beautiful, but stones mixed up to turn it over. Remettez-le ici. Soulevez-le. Voilà. It was like this on the bottom. I think in museum it's very interesting. C'est très curieux. Là, comment dire, c'est des bateaux qui ont jeté ces...
Equally baffled by the immense deposit, Kolonas hazards a guess that the pottery has been discarded over long periods by the people living on the peninsula. But Cousteau disagrees, points out that the pottery is too far from shore.
So if it was falling from here, it could be there. It is not there, it is here. Ah, bizarre, hein?
Under the watchful eye of Kolonas, the Calypso team is permitted to gather examples of the pottery and bring them to the surface, a cautious and laborious process. Many of the pots Cousteau discovers have become sanctuaries for small fish. One large bowl now is the residence of a girelle, a fish which punctually buries itself in the sand to rest each day, according to its own inner clock.
Ah oui, le voilà. Et la girelle?
Sadly, the girelle is sent house hunting as Falco brings her former home on deck.
You see here, on this side, little fish were living. That was the home of the little fish. Regardez ça.
Day by day, a growing array of pitchers, small two-handled amphoras, and bowls are brought up from the great reef of pottery in the bay. Almost without exception, Colonus declares, they belong to the Minoan civilization, which suddenly collapsed in the middle of the 15th century before Christ.
All Minoan? All Minoan. Huh? Yes. All this is Minoan. This is the most beautiful. Ah! C'est beau. Ah ben, ça fait plaisir de le toucher. You see, to my opinion, pots like this were not thrown away. They were not thrown away. It must be an accident, because they are beautiful and they, at this time they were valuable, I'm sure. So they cannot have been thrown away. There must have been a big accident.
A courageous diver, though lacking the prolonged daily experience of the Calypso team, Colonus now makes the descent to examine the pottery wall for himself. Awed and delighted by the vast display below, Colonus returns to the Calypso deck, laden with treasures.
So, how is it? Minoan. Huh? Minoan? Minoan, really? We found some pieces very small. This. Oh, beautiful. The same with deer. We found deer without magnifique. That very complex. Cap. Small cap. How old is that? How old? About 2000 before Christ. Before Christ? Yes.
Among the artifacts he has salvaged is a curious cup, whose handle has been placed on the inside, perhaps to protect the most breakable part. It is, in Falco's opinion, a questionable advantage when to pour the sauce, one has to put his fingers in it. Wishing to make a more extensive investigation of the site, Cousteau now deploys the Sissus, the compressor-driven suction pipe.
Stop.
Although a larger pipe is used in the excavation of wider areas, a narrower probe, or so-called ballpoint, such as the one here employed, is more efficient in making test penetrations in a random pattern. Working at the depth of 120 feet, the Sissus throws up an underwater shower of debris as it is moved from one location to another. At first, only a few minor artifacts are found. Then, almost everywhere, buried under 2 feet of sediment, the Sissus reveals a large number of building stones with chiseled contours. Neither a rise in the water level nor the remote possibility that they were lost as part of the ship's cargo satisfactorily explains their presence so far offshore. Scattered widely, the stones appear to have been hurled from the settlement on the peninsula by some colossal force. With Colonus and the young interpreter, John Mark Ulurith, Cousteau goes ashore to explore the site of the old port town once built along the peninsula. More and more, Cousteau is beginning to share some of the views of such scholars as Frost, Luce, Galanopoulos, and Marinatos, who argued that the collapse of Minoan power and the evidence of widespread destruction throughout the eastern Mediterranean were all related to the same vast geologic upheavals. Everywhere, atop the peninsula overlooking the bay, the shattered remains of tiny Minoan houses lie around them.
1 meter 25. Only. And about 3 meters, it comes up to here. 2 meters. How is it that these houses, these habitations are so small, so narrow?
Πώς έτσι και αυτές όλα αυτά τα σπίτια είναι τόσο μικρά και τόσο στενά? Ναι, αυτά τα σπίτια είναι τόσο μικρά γιατί είναι χαρακτηριστικό αυτής της εποχής. Ίσως να ήταν κατοικίες, ίσως εργαστήρια. Νέα συγκέντρωσης.
Colonus explains that both in dwellings and workshops, an assembly of small rooms was more stable and was characteristic of the time.
It's an enormous wall. It's not very thick, but it's very long. And it's on the top. What is it?
Συνεχίζεται από εδώ.
This is a whole building which is over there and which is at the upper part of the city. And all around this palace are the houses, the warehouses, the habitations and the shops which surrounded the palace.
But it's all flat and destroyed. I think I can imagine what happened in this place and all over the Mediterranean. You know, the problem of Crete, big problem of Crete is the sea raised by the north winds, the heavy seas beating the northern coast of Crete where there are very few shelters. So the small ships of antiquity were seeking shelter in Dia or here in Sira, like Calypso, for example. And I can imagine dozens of ships, of antique ships, here in this bay, one near the other. And then suddenly when the explosion of Santorini began, there was a tidal wave. And I can imagine this huge tidal wave, 330 feet high, coming here, sweeping clean all this peninsula, all the houses brushed clean into the sea, and sank all the ships at once. And I can imagine, I can dream of this catastrophe where all the Minoan ships, all the ships of antiquity were sunk all over the Mediterranean the same day by this tidal wave.
If indeed Minoan civilization was the original of Plato's Atlantis, then the answers to its sudden destruction may well lie 75 miles north of Crete, at the island sometimes known as Santorini, but more commonly called Thera. Here, once again, the helicopter lifts off to make the first reconnaissance. From the air, Thera today resembles the shards of a broken cup 10 miles across. The fragments are all that remain of a single island that erupted about 1450 BC in what is estimated to have been the loudest explosion ever heard on Earth. Around the caldera where once a mountain stood, the inner rim of cliffs reveal the successive layers of tephra, the volcanic pumice and ash deposited when more than 50 cubic miles of material were lifted into the air and carried across the entire East Mediterranean basin. From the shore, a path of long cement steps zigzags up the cliff for over a mile to the little town of Thera perched at the top. Waterless, dependent on rainfall trapped in cisterns or brought by ship, the Thera inhabitants raise little produce, are largely dependent upon the deposits left by the eruptions and earthquakes that still shake the island. From the layers of ash and pumice, shiploads of material were carried away in the 1860s for the building of the Suez Canal. Since classical times, the cliffs have even served as a kind of human rookery, where people have built dwellings and storerooms by scooping caves out of the pumice. At the center of the caldera, the Khameni Islands, the twin cones of a new volcano, have appeared since the immense earlier eruption. The first, Palea Khameni, in the 2nd century before Christ, the other, Nea Khameni, less than 400 years ago. Once again, the geologic cycle is in motion, building a new volcano which will explode in some new cataclysm, perhaps 10,000 years from now. Pocked with small craters, some filled with sulfur pools or simply gases, it is a landscape indifferent to man. From the deck of Calypso, the cindered shoreline of Nea Khameni appears grim and forbidding. With Falco and old associate Frederick Dumas, Cousteau outlines plans for an underwater survey at a depth of 60 to 120 feet along the north side of the island. The objective, to search for caves or fissures or indications of volcanic activity, as well as any possible signs of human artifacts.
toute l'eau est retirée vers la côte et peut-être ils vont voir là la sortie.
C'est là que je veux dire.
Le courant doit plaquer les eaux vertes.
Oui, que le chalot ait le courage d'aller à la pointe là-bas et faire revenir.
On va y aller.
But the diving team finds no bottom, only the sheer face of a precipice that falls away and vanishes in the murky depths. Upon this steep wall, the divers find no evidence of archaeological remains of Atlantis or any other civilization. Only an austere and formidable environment that makes no concessions to human need. Here, a stream of bubbles is a silent omen that deep below the great sea-filled cavity, geologic forces are still in motion. Throughout the caldera, the depths, even near the shoreline, vary from 600 to 1,200 feet. Thus, great areas of the volcanic basin lie well beyond the range of the divers. To explore this previously impenetrable domain, Cousteau now readies the soucoupe for the journey. Equipped with lights and camera and its own self-contained environment, it is a small two-man world in which Cousteau and Falco will go down nearly 1,000 feet.
The hook from the hoist is removed. We are free. We begin our descent into the void once occupied by the fiery magma chamber, which would pulverize a mountain, scatter it over 200,000 square miles, obliterate cultures, and change forever the course of human history. Yet, life returns. As we sink into the barren depth, the darkness closes around us. Even our powerful lights find nothing but an impenetrable black emptiness. For a long instant, I feel that, like Dante, I am on a journey to hell. Gradually, we rise again past the naked rocks. Again, I think of how often we stare at the heavens in wonder, yet are blind to the constellations near us, the interlocked worlds of unnumbered forms of life, each forever testing the limits within which it exists. The snail or the gull, the crab or the whale, the little giraffe with its inner metronome. It is only man who lives under the illusion that by crossing the walls of his environment, as indeed we have in the soucoupe, he has conquered nature.
In the caldera, all was calm. The violence of what may have been Earth's greatest explosion seemed remote, impossible, a trick of human memory. Now the soucoupe emerges from stillness into storm, where a running sea threatens to smash it against the Calypso's hull.
Patrick, vous pouvez envoyer le câble ici, le câble, tu peux nous le faire passer? Vous pouvez l'envoyer ici, là.
Finally, the cable is patched and held taut by the launch against threatened collision. At last retrieved from the sea and hoisted to the Calypso deck, the two tossed mariners climb out into the wind.
Voilà. Oui, ça souffle. Ça souffle, hein? C'est plus calme en bas. En bas, c'est le calme des grandes profondeurs. Alors, c'était beau? Ah, il y a des choses. Ah, 150 mètres de profondeur. Hein? 150.
To his associates, Cousteau tells of a singular discovery. Nearly 500 feet down, at a depth well beyond that reached by the pre-divers, and well beyond the life zone in the caldera, they have found a remarkable seam, perhaps 5 feet in width, that forms an almost continuous band around the underwater flanks of Nea Kameni. Unlike the larger rock above and below it, Cousteau and Falco report, the seam is composed of scoria, small broken stones which have been seared and blackened by great heat and flame. Based on his own observation and prevailing opinion among geologists, Cousteau believes the scorching of the rock has occurred not long ago, and that it represents clear evidence of continuing volcanic activity in the new magma chamber beneath the Earth's crust. Deceptively peaceful now, the great giant still mutters in its sleep. Even in relatively recent times, in 1925, in 1938, and even as late as 1956, eruptions and tremors have caused lives and damage on Thera that is still visible. None have even remotely approached the disastrous effects of the original paroxysm. The earthquakes that accompanied it, the fallout that destroyed crops and trees, finally the tidal wave that sank ships and swept away communities throughout the Aegean. One of the world's foremost volcanologists, Harun Taziev, describes what must have happened.
Dr. Taziev, we have prepared a scale model of Santorini as we guess it looked like 4,000 years ago before the explosion.
A little steeper.
A little steeper, or 4 times exaggerated. Now, what are your ideas about how it happened?
Well, my ideas are based upon what all the specialists have studied very carefully for many, many years. Well, according to geological evidence, it is almost sure that the volcano was apparently extinct. It was inactive since several centuries, when approximately 3,500 years ago it resumed its activity. And this first eruption, after many centuries of repose, was very violent indeed, and most probably people who have not been killed had to evacuate the island. The geological evidence is clear about this phase. And after this first eruption, which lasted maybe a few days, a few weeks, maybe a few months, the volcano again was asleep for a while, 10 or 20 years. After this lull, the eruption started anew, and in a few days it grew in intensity up to a formidable paroxysm. At Santorini, at Thera volcano, the eruption grew and grew in intensity, and in the last hour of this paroxysmic activity, tremendously huge quantities of energy and rocky material were hurled into the air. After all this matter had been ejected, a huge cave was created down below, and when all had been expelled, the upper part of the volcano collapsed suddenly in this cave. And this collapse created the huge caldera. The water followed, was sucked in, and then tremendous tidal waves were created.
In a model basin, a Hollywood studio once attempted to recreate the awesome power of a tsunami or tidal wave. If there remain any vestiges of a possible Atlantis site in the caldera, there is now no visible evidence. Any artifacts would lie forever buried under a huge mantle of volcanic ash. Even today, slight disturbance of the tephra along the steep underwater slope causes a ghostly avalanche. Ashore, the unstable tephra offers advantages. Believing Thera and Crete jointly formed the basis of the Atlantis legend, archaeologists at Thera in 1967 began excavations now supervised by Dr. Christos Duma.
Does it represent the entire city of Akotiri?
No, only one part of it, and we don't know what percentage of the city this uncovered area represents, because we have no limit in any point of the city.
You never reached the limit?
No.
What is this house here?
Here we have the north facade of the house Delta, and here is the staircase leading up to the first floor.
What is this, a square?
This is the square which, because of its shape, is called the triangle square. And here we have a large window in front of the building. Here is an interesting passage under the building connecting the two sides of the street.
Oh, yes.
Of the street.
You were passing actually here? It's public passage?
Yes, public passage.
Do you think that the people had time to evacuate the city?
Certainly, because first of all, we don't find any skeletons, and no victims have been noticed so far. And secondly, we have no precious objects, jewelry, vessels of precious metals, etc. So it is rather certain that they had the time to evacuate.
Already, more than 40,000 square feet lie under a protective shelter.
Oh, it's enormous. What a sight, really. It's incredible.
Under the roof, a growing network of streets still terminates in the encircling volcanic ash. Yet, like the amphoras and household artifacts embedded in the tephra, still awaiting release, out of the centuries, a community where people worked and laughed and dreamed is slowly emerging.
What was this little room?
Well, this is the room of the lilies. It was covered with frescoes, all three walls.
In this tiny, cramped little room?
Yes. And in front of us there was the large painting of the fresco with some swallows.
The swallows were here?
Yes.
Oh, they are beautiful.
And the other wall, much narrower, had also another swallow which goes to land on a flower. Mm-hmm. And on the other wall, there are also the swallows which were kissing.
Ah, yes. And what was this room used for?
We don't know, but it was found literally packed with pottery. About 250 vases were found here, and also the bed, which is in the museum, was also here.
So it must have been a small sleeping room, probably.
Probably.
Here, the past is very close. The sound of my own footfall might have been 4,000 years ago. It is easy to believe that in this spellbound square, time has stood still, that in a moment, children will come out to play.
It was in this building that we found the frescoes of the fleet, of the fishermen, of the...
In this building?
Riverscape, yes, in this building.
The long panel found in the so-called Admiral's House shows deer pursued by lions not found in Europe. Painted in the miniature style of the frescoes at Knossos in Crete, the long, elegant ships of the flotilla showed... Where are we here?
Here we are in the Pithoi storeroom. And these jars were found containing different kinds of grains.
Some of these are enormous.
Yes, they were found containing remains of various kinds of crops and seeds. And as you can see, some of them could contain several hundreds of kilos inside.
And why so many?
Well, this is the reason why we try to interpret this room as a storeroom for the community rather than for a family. As you see here, we have a large window at street level.
At street level, you generally don't have windows, is that right?
We have windows, but not so large,
Yeah.
small windows.
Yes.
But we have this evidence that they were paid workers and slaves in olives, in figs, in flour, etc. And probably somebody was sitting inside, keeping the accounting.
There was a queue outside.
There was a queue, and
they were giving their names or the
yes.
checks.
And if this happened, then we could easily consider this room as a bank.
Yeah, sort of a bank.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And these
are in position now, you see how nicely decorated they are. And they are still full of ash. We did not empty them yet.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And they had practically no animals here.
In the city, there is no evidence that animals lived in these houses.
Because it was a thickly populated area.
Yes.
Now, do you think there were frescoes in every house in this town?
So far, there is no house which has been excavated without frescoes.
Really?
Yes.
Is it not unusual? I mean,
it is unusual, and this is the reason why we believe that this was a wealthy community living here, and this suggests that the people were conducting activities supplying with this wealth, and this cannot be anything else than trade and shipping, and probably we can say here that we have a sort of wealthy bourgeois society.
Of ship owners.
Of ship owners.
How long do you think it will be until all this site is excavated?
I cannot estimate about all this site, but I can estimate what is under the roof.
Yes.
And this at least requires 50 years of work.
50 years?
50, well, it's not much when you count in centuries.
I thought it could go a little faster than that.
It is difficult to go faster because, as you know, the excavation is something like a book of which the pages, after being read, are destroyed. So we have to go very carefully and read very carefully and record everything before we proceed. Before we destroy the page. Well, here it is a typical example of the procedure how we do with the restoration of the frescoes. Here we have a corridor, the sides of which, as you see, they were covered with frescoes. We immediately blocked the whole thing and packed it with ash, volcanic ash, waiting for the specialist to come. Meanwhile, the parts which are uncovered have been covered with gauze, which is stuck on them, waiting. And from this place come these fragments, which show that we have lily flowers again.
So under the gates here are pictures?
Yes, they are.
So there is a buried treasure right here.
Yes, exactly. It is a treasure. Here in the laboratory we have several thousands of fragments like this, covered with gauze, and they are kept in drawers. Each drawer contains fragments from a different place. They are all catalogued and classified.
With several layers in each.
Yes, several layers in each drawer, you see. We have worked for several years here in the laboratory.
So that's the table on which you put the fragments together?
Yes, this is the ultimate jigsaw puzzle.
I should say so.
We have so many fragments after the gauze is removed, and in this we have a unique piece from this side with relief decoration, and in these frames we have this kind of sunflower or rosettes.
And when do you think this enormous work will be finished?
Well, it requires several months of work, if not a year, to be
before
completed.
It is sent to Athens to the National Museum?
Yes.
The salvaged bits of the paintings are transported to the museum laboratories in Athens. There, like elaborate jigsaw puzzles in which many of the pieces are missing, the frescoes are painstakingly reassembled by artisans and technicians. But the history of man and his illusions is less precise, flawed by uncertainties. though there are powerful arguments that Crete and its rich satellite Thera could have served as Plato's model for a high civilization destroyed by cataclysm, the jigsaw puzzle of the Atlantis myth remains incomplete. But perhaps Thera has left us something more. The eruption that ended the supremacy of Minoan culture preserved in volcanic dust these evidences of it. The shimmering landscape of Western civilization's virgin spring. In their frescoes, the Minoan artists told us of a fragrant world of animals and flowering plants, of playing children and mating birds. But they also revealed a less visible civilization that believed it might last forever. Today, in the depths of a caldera, sponge fishermen find an arduous and uncertain living. In good years and bad, they come to harvest the sponges for the market at Aegina near Athens. They have put aside the old helmeted diving suits, now depend on multiple air hoses attached to a common source at the surface. Out of experience, each team has improvised its own decompression system, but the danger remains. Almost all, by the age of 40, have been crippled by the bends. It is, they feel, part of the cost of gathering sponges.
On the rim in Thera, the artists no longer paint frescoes. Yet, life goes on. Each day is a reminder that man has always lived on the edge of extinction by earthquake or plague, by famine or his own folly. Here, each man knows it is best to tend one's field and be thrifty with water, keep peace with neighbors, pray to whatever gods are handy, and if your wings are made of wax, do not fly too close to the sun.
Society and KCET are jointly responsible for the content of this program.